Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the value of a trainer and working with a training rifle and why it's so important to have it part of your shooting repertoire or to have in your arsenal as far as becoming a great marksman. So I want to dive into talking about the concepts, how to approach it, and some pros and cons with some of the options that we have out there today. So ought to be a great podcast. Without further ado, here we go. All right, before we get started, I do want to say thank you to Krieger Barrels. Krieger is the maker of fine-cut rifle barrels made in the great state of Wisconsin. They are probably one of the finest rifle barrels in the world. They offer a new program called Krieger Direct where you can order your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you want the best and you need it now, stop over to KriegerBarrels.com and look for Krieger Direct. That's KriegerBarrels.com. We'd also like to thank MDT, maker of awesome chassis. They have a lot of new stuff coming out this year, some new programs. Again, the Oryx chassis, probably one of my favorite unsung heroes for a $400 chassis that I really think competes with any chassis under $1,000, to the MDT ACC Elite. They have a great variety. They're world-class stock makers. And I always say if you want to shoot 700 yards and beyond, the rifle has to fit you perfectly. And sometimes to do that, you have to find a stock that fits you well and can be adjustable. So you can learn more about MDT and all the great options they have at mdttac.com. That's mdttac.com today. So we're getting into spring here. Things are moving along, getting excited to get out and start shooting. We got lots of cool stuff coming up in the shooting season this year. Hopefully get a chance to go out and shoot some matches. In the spring, I always go back to why you're getting tuned up and for hunters getting ready for the upcoming season, this fall, just food for thought on how to really get the best out of you and your shooting and your training. That's, to me, is the big one, is, how to train properly, get the most bang for your dollar as far as trigger time, and then the value of having a training caliber. So you'll see in today's market, we have everything from high-end PCP air guns like the FX, which I think are fantastic. I'm super excited to get one someday. They're just world-class PCP air guns and certainly can shoot with a 22 long rifle out to 200 or 300 yards. Then you've got 22 long rifles and you've got extreme long-range 22 long rifle ammunition and all the things that come along with it. And what I find to be amazing with the 22 long rifles is how far you can shoot them and how fun they are to shoot. The reason I want to caution you on picking either of these two for a dedicated trainer. So they are great to go out and get trigger time. A great example would be we had a gentleman come through the shooting school who was a big PCP air gunner. Obviously, his fundamentals were super solid. The trigger time is trigger time. Pulling the trigger is pulling the trigger. However, though, for those that want to go one step beyond just getting actual trigger time, I think getting a rifle that has a little bit of recoil or pulse to it has a little more value as far as a realistic trainer. In other words, not being surprised when your non-training rifle goes off and a rifle lurches or jumps or recoils, because having a zero recoiling rifle, falls into that category, so you don't get the challenges of the rifle moving around or having to readjust the rifle for the follow-up shot, and you get lulled into just laying there and just working the bolt and pulling the trigger. You don't have to deal with the recoil and the movement that it causes. And I think for a dedicated trainer, there's value to that because we're not training just to shoot. So, for example, like a PCP air gun, I'm super excited to get one. I have held off on buying one. I'm waiting maybe this year to purchase one. I think they're going to be super fun to train with and play with. And, they really have their place in an arsenal as far as having value to getting good trigger time. I have no arguments with that whatsoever. But that said, though, if you are training to go on a big game hunt, if you are training to do match shooting, having one of those to maybe practice at home when you can't get to the range would be awesome. But making it your dedicated trainer for a bigger caliber, I think comes with a little bit of trade-off. And the same thing with a 22 long rifle. getting trigger time is trigger time. I totally agree with that concept. And I think, being able to go out and do any type of shooting is better than no shooting at all, right? But I always say keep in mind what you're training towards or what you're working towards. So, for example, if you're a big game hunter, obviously going out and practicing with a 7 PRC or 300 Win Mag all summer long, you are not going to train as much as you should. You might go out and pull the trigger a couple of times. You might go out and shoot some distance. You really might put a heck of an effort in and shoot a couple hundred rounds that year, which would be awesome. However, though, you're not going to shoot 600-700 rounds. You're not going to practice, an hour shooting off a tripod or an hour shooting off of, unstable, awkward positions like your backpack. You're not going to train. You're going to put the rifle through some shooting scenarios, but you're not going to train or practice those scenarios for any length of time. I always like to say that one of the biggest things that helped me grow early as a shooter was I had a twin to my rifle. Now, I built it. It was a 223, and it mirrored my match gun at that time was a 260. Prior to that was a 308, but I always had a 223 trainer. The value of a 223 trainer in my mind was, A, the barrels don't get as hot as fast. B, you have a little bit of recoil. So in other words, you could make a lighter weight version of your hunting rifle to match it if you wanted to, and still have a little bit of recoil, have the rifle bounce around, having to work the bolt like you typically would, working brass in and out, that longer bolt throw, have real follow-up times. All of these things add value. And man, when I built a trainer, because back then, even prior to me gunsmithing, you didn't want to shoot your match barrel out just beating it up, doing these practice scenarios of working what I call running the gauntlet with holdover drills. You're just going to be pounding rounds downrange, cooking the daylights out of your barrel, and then hoping you can find, who was the previous gunsmith to rebarrel another barrel for you, right? Having a trainer was even that much more important, to have something that you could put tons of rounds downrange, not overheat the barrel as fast, get more trigger time before you had to let the barrel cool, and still realistically train out to 8, 9, and 1,000 yards with a training rifle legitimately. So where the PCP and the 22s might fall off 200-300 yards as far as being a legitimate trainer, right? The 223 shooting a 75 grain bullet is a perfect training combination, even out to 700 yards. Beautiful. Anywhere in that distance, working with the wind, all of that, it is legit. 700 and beyond, it is there, but it just doesn't hit the steel quite as hard. You have to have somebody either spotting or clean targets or be good on the spotting, scope watching for somebody else. It just doesn't have a big footprint. We have shot 223s to 1,000 yards for decades. Thinking about what you want to accomplish this year in the match world or in the hunting world, the value of a 223 trainer just cannot be understated. Now, I get it that building an exact replica of your match gun or an exact replica of your hunting rifle in another caliber, for some people it's hard to do, for sure. I had a twin. Mine was an Accuracy International chassis system. I had the same exact setup, same stock, same scope, same everything. And it was expensive. It was really expensive, actually. Now, what is nice is the fact that you can take your match gun and take your scope off, take your barreled action out, swap out your barrel for a 223, swap out your bolt head, and now your match gun legitimately is a 223 trainer with the investment of a bolt head and a barrel, and in our case, an ace system or a chamber, right? You could leave it set up, you could practice, train, go do barricades, leave it set up for a couple of weeks, go out, get some rounds down. Then as you start getting closer to the match, switch it all right back. Nothing changes. Your harmonics stay the same. Your zeros stay the same. When you put your new scope back on, you're not going to be all over the place. You should still be on paper. A small adjustment to re-zero for having everything put back on with your new barrel. Do some practicing before the match with your legitimate match gun at that point, and then go and enjoy the match. And same thing for hunting scenarios. Like I would build, if I was going on a big game hunt, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If I had, let's just say I used an MDT HNT 26 and 7 PRC, or in this case, mine would probably be a 6.5 PRC. I'm a short action guy, right? So I built a 6.5 PRC or a 260 or 6.5 Creed or 22 Creed if you're shooting solids at 100, 200 yards, right? Whatever is your cup of tea for a rifle. But if you stay in a short action cartridge, in my case, let's just say we used HNT 26, if we stayed with a short action and built something like the 6.5 Creedmoor for a hunting rifle, we could change that out to a 223, go varmint hunting all summer long with it, practicing with that rifle, shooting off of a tripod. We had a customer here yesterday, and this is going to be a totally another podcast, and we'll be adding this stuff to our online long-range shooting school as the year persists and as our weather breaks. He was talking about learning to shoot off of a tripod, and if we teach that, and we have in the past, and he was talking about how baffled he was that you see the videos of guys mounting up their rifle on a tripod, locking in with an Arca rail, and they're not easy. It makes it look like, wow, I just lock it in here and pull the trigger and the bullet's going to run right down. Right? It's not that stable. And it takes practice and a fair amount of practice. And if you try to do it with a heavy recoiling rifle, yeah, you're going to get some trigger time, right? But you're not going to practice it as much. And if you really want to get good at shooting off of a tripod, you have to spend a lot of time rebuilding and shooting and rebuilding and shooting. I mean, the old saying that, hey, it takes 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours to master anything, it really does hold true. There's no fast track. Once you get the knowledge, you have to practice. It's sort of like flying an airplane. Just because they taught you to land an airplane one time doesn't mean you shouldn't get out there and practice it 10,000 times to embed it. So that way, when you're being distracted by weather and you're being distracted by all of these things, you're fundamentally sound landing the airplane. And the same thing happens with shooting. If you practice a lot, and if you practice in different conditions, and you practice this on a daily or weekly or monthly basis leading up to the hunt, then when you're there and the animal's out there 400 yards, the wind's blowing around, you're less than stable, you're shooting downhill ever so slightly, so you're trying to work with the front legs or rear legs being at different lengths, but you're fundamentally sound shooting off of it. You just have to readjust it for the conditions. And I think that's where practice turns into practical application. Once you practice something to the point to where you start to master it or you really start to understand it, all of a sudden it becomes like driving your car. You really don't think about where the brake pedal's at anymore. You really don't think about where the gas pedal's at anymore. Somebody pulls out in front of you, you will slam that brake on without ever thinking about it, right? Nobody goes like, where's the brake? And then hits the brake. Same thing happens with shooting. You have to train beyond that point, though. You have to work with the rifle to get beyond the point to where things become natural. And now you can only recognize when things, or you only need to recognize things when they're wrong. Then you're going to adjust. So, for example, you go to pick your foot up to put on the brake and you feel your shoe on the back of the brake pedal or catch the side of it. You're going to readjust your shoe over to hit the brakes, right? But you don't have to think about hitting the brakes. You don't have to think about where the turn signal is. You don't have to think about letting go of the wheel as you finish a turn to let it sort of naturally spiral back out the straight again. You probably don't even need to look how to put the car in drive. You're not looking. You're stepping your foot on the brake, reach down, grabbing it, and it's 4 clicks back or 3 clicks back or whatever it might be to get back in the normal drive, and away you go. That's shooting, and that's practicing to that point. My point is here, without making this too long of a podcast, is there is a huge value to training with a training rifle because you will shoot more, you'll practice more, you can do it for less. In other words, you can buy cheap .223 ammunition to practice at 200 and 300 yards standing. Even if the rifle didn't shoot at the greatest, even if it shot a minute, it's still good enough to practice shooting steel at 200 yards or 300 yards or, working on fundamentals. So you don't have to have premium ammunition to do it. And it's going to excel you extremely fast into being comfortable using that rifle in that position when it is your actual match or hunting caliber. I like to say that some of the matches that I've shot in the past, like for example, I won the Allegheny Sniper Challenge in 2012, which is really awesome, right? Competing against 60 of the best shooters that they can find, and including some active duty snipers and sniper teams. Now, I never look at my score at a match, and I'm not saying any of this braggingly, but the reason I'm bringing this particular subject up is the fact that it was the most comfortable I had ever been in a match. I really felt like I could just whistle to the rifle, and the rifle would run over and make the shot and come back and sit beside me like a loyal companion. I felt like I was cheating, really. I mean, everything just felt so natural. Everything was so relaxed. And it had really paid dividends on the training with that training rifle. Like, it was the most fun I ever had in a match, honestly. And I thought I did well. I certainly thought I was in the top 10. And I went down to congratulate the winner of the match. And I thought, I probably got in the top 10. Maybe I got in the top 5. I had no idea that I won the match. Really didn't think I did because there were some world-class shooters in there. And I always say this, there's luck involved in any match that you win. There's skill and there's all this practice that you do and blow on your knuckles and rub it on your chest and give everybody a big grin. But we all know that there's luck involved in all of it. The gods smiled on us that day, and we got that one lucky round that just went where it was supposed to rather than just went off the target, or we caught the edge of a target that was so close to being a miss. These are things that happen. But when I went down and the guys were like, congratulations. And I was looking around like, you guys talking to me? They're like, yeah, you won. I was like, no way. I was so excited. It was probably one of the highlights of my shooting back in those days. So it was one of those matches extremely hard to win. You had to range all of your targets using your reticle. No rangefinders allowed. So you had to mill every target using your reticle before you could even engage it. A lot of it was timed events where you're shooting and engaging multiple targets in different distances, different sizes, or even in different orders. So having that ingrained on working the bolt, following up and shooting, that's ingrained by putting lots of rounds downrange. And I think with having a rifle that has a little bit of recoil to it is a more true representation of what you're going to be going through when you're shooting your real caliber. So for example, in my case, a 260 back then, but in a hunting scenario, shooting a hunting caliber. I'm going to say that if you're going to do anything as far as a trainer goes, I'm absolutely for you buying a 22 long rifle. I think they're awesome and super fun to shoot. Absolutely for PCP air guns. Again, incredible pieces of equipment. But for a trainer, in my mind, I want something with a little more recoil. So it's a little bit more real to having and shooting a rifle that you're going to be shooting when you're shooting the match or the hunting trip. One of the beauties about, I think, any type of system out there right now, especially in the market that we're in right now, is a lot of them you can buy pre-fit components to purchase to change your match gun to a 223. It's not just our rifles that allow that. And we have an ACE system, which makes ours a little bit different, but you can use the same stock. You can use the same scope, same ring, same action. Everything's the same. You're going to swap out two parts and maybe change up your magazine to a 223, but you can change out probably your bolt face or your bolt and change out your barrel, and you've turned your legitimate hunting rifle or your match gun into a legitimate trainer. I used to take it out groundhog hunting. One of my favorite things to do in the summer, especially practicing, was like real world application. You always got stuck in awkward positions and shooting off your pack or shooting off your buddy's shoulder. All of this stuff happens when you're groundhog hunting, right? Or woodchuck or varmint hunting. I just absolutely loved it. I mean, for me, stretching a 223 out to 880 yards on a woodchuck is incredible. And then not only that, but to knock a nice softball size hole in them is pretty cool too. So if you use the right bullets and you get the right load worked up, you can still anchor them pretty good. And at close range, they're devastating. You can take advantage of going out and using it for lots of other things, varmint hunting, coyote hunting, all of these things where you could use it in real world scenarios. But just want to throw out there as we're getting into our shooting season, it is coming up. There is a huge value to having a trainer. There is a huge value to you to be able to go out and afford to shoot more and practice more and not feel guilty while you're doing it that you're either burning up a ton of money or burning up your actual hunting rifle or match rifle. Now, before I continue on, I do want to say that it's really important before the hunt to go ahead and switch back out to your legitimate caliber, or before a match. Put your match caliber back on there, whether it's a 260, 6.5 Creed, 22 Creed, switch it back out to your match gun now, and now go out and spend a week or two practicing, training, making sure everything's tight and right, everything's tight in the spec, work on your dope a little bit, work on your rifle in those positions, but now shooting your match gun, and then off to the match as you go. And it's cool because you're shooting the same exact rifle. Nothing has changed, just a little bit more recoil to deal with, but you're already in the groove. You don't have to look for the brake pedal anymore. You're 100% know what you're doing next. You'll recover to get to the target, although you have a little bit more recovery time. You're just going to feel a lot more confident in both match shooting and in the hunting scenarios. Before I continue on, I do want to say a quick thank you to Triggertech. Triggertech is a maker of fine rifle triggers. We put them in and recommend them for all of our rifle kits here. They are safe, they are easy to install, they are easy to adjust, and for me personally, I really do think they're the best trigger on the market. They offer a single stage, they offer 2-stage, straight shoes, curved shoes, lots of really cool options that we just didn't have in years past. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, a great way to do it is to put a super high quality trigger in it. And if you do that, we really recommend taking a look at Triggertech. So you can look at all the fine options they have today at Triggertech.com. That's Triggertech.com today. So some news and updates going on for the next couple of weeks. We have a long-range shooting school offsite coming in Florida. We're about 2.5 to 3 weeks away from our 3-day class in Florida. And then don't forget, we have our movers class in Georgia following that, and it's the 3rd week of March. We have 2 slots left for our Florida class. If you would like to join us, we would love to have you. All of our classes here at home are booked now through August. So our May, June, and July classes are full. Our next slot that we have open is in August. I think we have 11 slots total for the year available here at our home school. If you want to join us in the spring and do so before we get into August and September, Florida is your last chance to join us for this year. We have 2 slots left. We'd love to have you. I will be teaching the class personally. The class at Florida is set to 10, so our home school is always set to 5. Because this is a remote class and it is taught off-site by an invite down there, we have a lot of expenses in renting the range and travel time and all the other things. So rather than raise the price of the class extraordinarily, we allowed 10 people to come through. You're still going to get lots of great information. And we have lots of previous students attending. So it ought to be a great time. You're going to meet some people who have been through the classes before. And of course, I will be there teaching the class personally. You can learn more about that at wolfprecision.net. We're also starting back into our online long-range shooting school content. We're going to be talking about getting and practicing what we would consider our shooting test. So our next subject we're going to be talking about is hold over and hold off. This is a drill that we do on graduation day or on our last day of the class where we're actually putting people to the test. And I'm going to dive a little bit more into that in the online course to talk a little bit about how to practice this and the value of it. The weather's breaking here. We're going to get a chance to go out and actually film some of it with some of our trainers. So it'll give you a chance to actually see how we practice and how we train and how we sort of go after what we consider our holdover drills. That's going to be the next. And then we're going to start into some of our bonus content, which is also going to be preparing your rifle for a match, preparing your rifle for a hunt, all the things that you need to do to make sure that your rifle is ready to go. So you can learn more about that at Wolf Precision and look for our online long-range shooting school. And of course, it's powered by Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, if you enjoy the podcast and like to support the podcast, you can stop over to Patreon for $3 a month. Be part of our Wolf Pack here. We really appreciate all those that have signed up to support the show. That actually helps out a lot, allows us to spend the time to record and edit the show, as well as all the cool equipment that we have to buy to get the best audio quality out of everything that we do here. So thank you, everybody, for doing that as well. The last thing that I would like to share is don't forget about our blog post. And we talked about writing small articles here, and I consider them like 3 or 4 paragraphs of almost food for thought. In this next blog post, we're going to be talking more about ricochets, which we talked about in the previous podcast. We did get some emails, and we got some people that did reach out to us and talk with us a little bit about concerns that they had, or just catching them off guard at why this has to be taken into consideration, and really thinking about your bullet selections when you're out there doing this type of stuff. So, for example, if you are practicing with a 223, you can buy military surplus ammunition that might feed through your gun perfect. But you got to be really careful using that stuff, especially full metal jackets, for any type of practicing where you don't have a good solid backstop, and you have to be very aware of your background, what's behind your target, and if you bounce one out, where that is actually going to go. So we're going to be posting up another blog, and this one's going to be a little bit deeper into the ricochet, and we'd like to invite you to stop over and check it out. It's at wolfprecision.net. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. We have a couple interviews coming up. In the next coming podcast, we are going to try to invite Bruce back on for another interview. We have a new action or receiver that's going to be available here soon, and we'd like to have Bruce introduce it and talk a little bit about it and why it's so important and just what it might mean to the shooters out there that are getting this type of competition. And we have the prototypes here now, so we'll be doing a video review on it as well. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. We really appreciate it. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a nice comment. It helps us be found. If you'd like to share it, somebody that's into shooting and you'd like to share the podcast, that helps us as well in all of our ratings. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you are listening to Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.